Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the potentially quite serious weather associated with Storm Isha, which is set to move through the UK and Ireland tonight. So we're going to start off right away by looking at the satellite imagery on windy.com. You can see here is Storm Isha. The low centre is likely located somewhere in here, and it's spinning away quite menacingly now. You can see a pretty classic looking kind of swirl shape to that low, with a large amount of cloud and rain now moving into Ireland and then eventually the rest of the UK during the night. And actually, if we zoom in to the satellite image here, you can just about make out the low-level clouds on the satellite image, kind of located in this zone here. You can see how fast they are moving, indicating that the wind at the surface is already very strong and will only get stronger. Also, kind of just for fun, we can look at the water vapor imagery as well, and you can see we've got dry air now wrapping into the center, and then we have very impressive kind of cloud wrapping around that as well. So very classic textbook looking low really developing now, with also a large amount of moisture being pushed into the UK and Ireland as well, which will cause quite a lot of heavy rainfall during the evening on kind of west facing coasts and hills. And the strongest winds are going to be located to the south of that centre, kind of within this zone, and they're pushing east now. Just on that topic actually, if we look at the current observed wind gusts, you can see the maximum so far is 79 miles an hour here at Capel Curig in northwest Wales. That is quite an exposed mountainous site, but we also have very strong winds in excess of 60 miles an hour, gusts now moving into parts of western and southern Ireland, and these winds will only be increasing during the next few hours or so, also moving further northeast, and eventually within the next 24 hours all of the UK will have seen some of these very strong winds. In terms of the weather warnings from the Met Office, we have a very unusual kind of setup in that pretty much everywhere in the UK, aside from two areas, those being kind of Shetland here, and then also eastern and southern England, including Greater London, all of those areas except all of the UK except those two areas are under an amber warning of wind. And I do not think I can recall any one time where we've had this situation before, where so much of the UK is under an amber warning. Generally, across the north, we've got the amber warning here for pretty much all of mainland Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. This comes into force this evening, and we're generally expecting winds 60 to 70 miles an hour in this zone, and then slightly less further south, but generally same timing, comes into force in the evening, kind of around 6 p.m. For this region, and then generally moves further east with these strong winds pushing out of the east by the early morning. We also have yellow warnings of rain, potentially up to kind of 100 millimeters or so in places, but I'll kind of put the link in the description so you can read the details of these warnings, because the main focus on this video is kind of the wind. So those metaphors warnings are quite broad, but I made this graphic here just to give a rough kind of guidance on what you can expect in your area. So the chart basically shows that everywhere in the UK and Ireland is going to be seeing wind gusts at least 55 to 60 miles an hour. You can see kind of lowest generally here across the south, southern, central areas, and generally increasing as you move to the northwest, and possibly parts of kind of northern and western Scotland seeing wind gusts. Also, this is more western and southwestern Scotland, but parts of Scotland seeing wind gusts in excess of 80 miles an hour. And also bear in mind, this is just a rough guidance, kind of a rough guide, sorry. So winds may exceed or be below these kind of forecasted values locally, depending on topography, last minute model changes, that kind of thing. And also assume that if you're on a coast or an exposed hill, wind gusts will be higher. For example, kind of a coastal hill in this area of western Scotland may actually see wind gusts in excess of 90 miles an hour, but we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. I just thought it'd be interesting also to show the surface pressure chart for Storm Isha. This was the chart from a couple of hours ago now, showing an already very deep low of 958 millibars. Also note how expansive the strong pressure gradient is, all the way from Ireland to kind of the middle of the Atlantic, or just about, and that's going to be pushing eastwards as the storm moves eastwards or northeastwards as well. So a quite expansive wind field and quite long duration of the winds. But then particularly, this is quite an impressive chart here, a low of 949 millibars by midnight, located just to the north of Scotland here. And notice we have a very tight squeeze in the ice bars across all of the UK and Ireland at some point, with also a couple of cold fronts as well, bringing the risk of some squally winds, that kind of thing as well. Also, just turn your attention to the occluded front moving through Scotland during the very late evening into early Monday. I'll look at this in more detail shortly, but we will potentially see a very, very strong area of wind gusts associated with this. But like I said, we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. This is the kind of, actually I think a new run's come out now, but this is the Icon 12 o'clock run, showing some very impressive model output. This is our low now, rapidly deepening, and it just looks very classic, very menacing, and it's going to be pushing to the northeast, like we know. And if I run through that loop, you can see very clearly, initially we've got very strong winds across the south, heavy rain, also heavy rain across Scotland, and then also notice this very squeeze in the ice bars here, very strong winds pushing through those areas through the very early hours of the morning. Now if we do a little bit more analysis here, we're going to look at the above surface winds. So usually we'd look at kind of the surface winds or the surface wind gusts. This is the wind at 925 millibars, so kind of a couple hundred meters above the ground. It reduces slightly some of the kind of frictional interaction with the land, and it's quite useful in forecasting gust speed, actually, as I'm about to show you here, because you can kind of look at how the wind at just above the ground can translate to the surface. So one thing you'll notice here is the area of kind of yellow and orange colors. Actually, let me change the color of this pen here. The area of yellow and orange colors to the northwest of Ireland. Now this is associated with our occlusion, and it's going to be tracking northeast through the late evening, likely making landfall, if you like, somewhere along the west coast of Scotland, as this chart shows, by around midnight or so, pushing into one of these regions here. Now if we take a sounding, you can see that the air in this zone is relatively unstable. The red line here is pushing to the left, so that's our lapse rate, and you can see it's actually near the surface following the dry adiabatic lapse rate. That's this kind of dashed line here, the thin grey line. That's actually kind of the theoretical maximum decrease in height you can have. So there is a fair amount of, what you basically can say is the atmosphere in this lower portion, just above the ground, is not stable. So what that means is all the air parcels in here will be very turbulent. They'll be moving around a lot. And what that means is that some of the much stronger winds just above the ground, so here you can see the wind gusts reading 80 and 90 knots just above the ground. That translates to around kind of 90 to 100 miles an hour. Some of those gusts could very briefly be brought down to the surface. Some of those winds may very briefly get brought down to the surface in a gust, and so actually you're looking at the potential for extremely strong winds across Scotland by kind of midnight or so. And if we just take an example of this, we can use the arpege model. This is the French model. It sometimes overestimates the wind gusts, but I find it to be a fairly good model for this. And you can see that by kind of 9 o'clock, there's our occlusion. With the very strong winds on the south side. Actually, let me change the color of this pen, and then you can see, this is fine. Anyway, and then you can see by midnight winds in excess of 90 miles an hour pushing here into the western coast of Scotland, and especially where this area is quite hilly and there's a lot of coast. So what that means is that some places are really going to get battered here. We're looking at structural damage. Any trees there could be brought down. We could be seeing power disruption, that kind of thing. And then those winds, they generally weaken with time, but still making landfall with very strong northwesterly winds are there, with kind of 80, 90 miles an hour, and then generally weakening as it interacts with the land, but still really bringing the potential for gusts in excess of 70 miles an hour quite widely inland across Scotland during the early morning tomorrow, including populated places Edinburgh, Glasgow, the kind of central belt of Scotland, quite populated really, so definitely the potential for disruption with those strong winds passing through there. And then you can see transferring to the northeast, likely clearing the mainland by around 4 or 5 a.m. But I mean, really, look at those strong winds remaining of threat throughout the morning. So it could be quite a noisy, actually quite a kind of worrying few hours or so across Scotland during the early hours of tomorrow morning, with that occlusion pushing through. The ice bars are really squeezed together, and as I just showed you, the very, very strong winds just above the surface could get mixed down to some pretty nasty gusts. Now, looking at the inland wind threat, there is a fair amount of a kind of discrepancy, uncertainty within the high resolution models. For example, if I show you the ARPEG, you can see it brings here what is actually quite a concerning scenario: 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts widely through this portion of kind of England and Wales, as you can see here. If I show you, however, kind of the icon model, what you might see instead is much lower wind speeds, generally in the range of 50 to 60 miles an hour. Now, do not get me wrong, 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts are still strong. They will still cause disruption, but not quite as much kind of power as a 50, 60 mile an hour, sorry, a 60, even 70 mile an hour gust would have. But if we take a look again, kind of using the same method, the above surface winds, and we actually have fairly good agreement on this between the main models, the above surface winds away from this occlusion and away from kind of the Irish sea coasts, the above surface winds are actually strongest in this kind of zone of southern England or so. So theoretically, if this does mix down, you could see the risk of kind of 60, 70 knot winds, which is kind of 70 miles an hour or so, even a bit higher. But you could potentially see those gusts being brought down locally into central southern England. However, if we take a look at the sounding here, you can see it's a lot less unstable. The dry adiabat is, as you can see here, completely much more steeper than what we've got here. This is closer to the moist adiabatic lapse rate, so it's perhaps getting even into the territory of not even being unstable, actually being stable. So well, there is still the risk of it, because you do have a little bit of instability there. The amount of kind of turbulent mixing and air parcels which are brought down from the very strong zone here to the actual surface is likely to be a bit lower. So the gust risk is not quite as high in the south, but still I would watch the high resolution models fairly closely, because it's always possible you could get a couple last minute changes and we actually see more of the south seeing a higher risk of wind speeds. And possibly, I wouldn't rule out that a couple areas within this kind of white zone see gusts more than 60, 65, possibly approaching 70 miles an hour, but it's likely to not be widespread. At least that's what it looks like at this stage. Generally across the south, we're looking at 40 to 50 miles an hour, in line with the icon model, like I showed you here, or the GFS, as you can see, looks like a similar thing here. Actually, I say that the latest GFS is more of an upgrade. If we look here, yeah, the latest GFS is more of an upgrade. It actually brings the risk of 70 mile an hour gusts into the Midlands. No, sorry, this is the old one, so forget that. But still, like I said, the risk of strong gusts here, though I would lean more towards the icon, because that just seems generally more in line with other models like the Rome, the UKV. In terms of timing, though, looks like it's going to happen in the late evening, kind of 10 o'clock to midnight across the south there, and the southeast. Potentially we could see that Met Office amber warning updated, though it doesn't look particularly likely. Then away from those areas, the Irish Sea coasts will actually kind of act as a bit of a funnel for that southwesterly wind. So especially parts of northwest England and North Wales could see some very, very nasty wind gusts. If we just take a look at the icon for here, you can see widely across the northwest we're seeing gusts in excess of 70, approaching 80 miles an hour, similar across North Wales. Now the icon probably overdoing this slightly, but still that is a very considerable speed, and so especially along kind of the coast of the Irish Sea, do take things very seriously. Do not kind of travel during the evening, and kind of do not try and clear trees, that kind of thing. Now, one more kind of more conditional thing is if we look at the Toro severe weather forecast, they do have a tornado watch out across Scotland, Northern England, Ireland and Northern Ireland. This is indicating that with the very strong wind shear that we're going to have during the evening and small amounts of instability, any showers that do develop, they could, number one, bring very strong wind gusts down to the surface, but they could, number two, bring the threat of a weak tornado or two. Maybe actually not even weak, but the threat of a tornado or two, though the the potential for any one location in this tornado risk to see a tornado is exceptionally low. So do not be worried about it. Just be wary that it's a thing that could happen somewhere. You might see it on the news tomorrow, etc., etc. But anyway, that's kind of the summary from our storm. Very strong wind gusts now looking likely. As you can see here, the bulk of the winds through... Oh, actually, I forgot to talk about Ireland and Northern Ireland. I'll just do that quickly here. You can see Ireland and Northern Ireland likely to see similar very strong wind speeds. Most of the island of Ireland is going to be seeing wind gusts more than 70 miles an hour. The further northwest you go, potentially 80 miles an hour along coast could also be higher as well. And we actually have Met Aaron red warnings for this area in black right here, you can see. So that's something to be keep an eye on, and that threat is going to come earlier as well. You can see strong winds already impacting Ireland within a couple of hours per these forecast models. So really quite a kind of dangerous scenario all round. And the kind of latest arpeggiator also just came in line with what we've been saying. Very strong damaging winds likely to impact all of the UK and Ireland as a result of Storm Isha. So stay safe everyone. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Bye bye.